Okay, so what is Palo Alto? So Palo, sort of like Juniper, it's a network security device. The manufacturer produces various products, including firewalls. Um, and luckily, we have access to virtualized Palos. Not a lot of people actually do. So that gives us a nice little testing bed to actually play around with these things. So like Juniper has JuneOS, Palo Alto has PanOS. PanOS is the operating system for Palo firewalls. It has a really nice web interface, much nicer than the Juniper web interface. Apparently Mike Rippo thinks the CLI is a little bit less intuitive. I like it anyway. But the big thing about Palo is that they have a really good layer 7 filtering. So that's the application layer. So they can pick out whether certain traffic is HTTP traffic, not just based on the port, but based on the actual data that's going through. So it keys in on the actual format of HTTP requests to match that and make sure that you're only allowing through traffic that looks like web traffic. So the CLI modes, similar to Juniper, you have your operational mode. That's where you log in first. But unlike Juniper, you're just going to get dumped straight into the CLI. There's no actual Linux-like bash interface or anything like that. There's no scripting interface, nothing like that. You just get dumped straight into the CLI, where you can check things like your interfaces and things like that. And obviously, you can get into configuration mode by doing configure, and that's how you'll sort of mess around with the firewall. Very similar to Juniper. And then a big thing in Palo's, sort of like in Juniper, has the host inbound security with their allowing web traffic and SSH traffic to the actual host itself. Palo Alto's have management profiles, which do the same sort of thing. So they allow access via SSH or web or ping or things like that. You can manage what types of traffic can actually reach the Palo itself, and sort of limit who can administer it. And then you have security zones, just like in Juniper. Basically, you have your zone-to-zone firewall rules, sort of like in the Juniper firewall. There are also a few default rules that'll be in there by automatically. So you have an intra-zone default, so that's within the same zone. So if you have two different interfaces connected to one zone, by default it'll allow traffic between those two interfaces. Or if you have multiple subnets in the same zone, it'll do the same thing. And then you have the interzone default policy, which is from basically if you try to go in between zones, say trust to untrust or untrust to trust, it'll by default block that. Oftentimes, if you're in a competition setting, they'll just change that default interzone policy to allow, and they'll just allow traffic through automatically. And an important thing to remember with the default policy stuff is that it always happens at the end. They show up in your rule set like their regular rules, but they always get run at the end. So they're always at the end of the chain there. And then again, you also have a virtual router, which is on the system, sort of like Juniper as well. You always have to have at least one default virtual router so you can actually route traffic between your different interfaces. Basically, that's the area that you go to assign static routes. And you assign different interfaces to different virtual routers. So you can sort of have maybe 2 or 3 different routers inside this one host device, which makes it really customizable. Important things for security. There's some monitoring. We'll get deeper into this stuff as we get into the lab part. It has some really nice monitoring features. So basically on the front, on the dashboard page, you'll see who is logged in currently and what IP addresses they're logged in from. So that's going to be really important. If, say, a red teamer gets onto your Palo Alto system, you can see the IP address they're coming from. You can see that they're actually online and using the system. There's also going to be some really nice logging functionality for, say, if it's blocked certain threat traffic, it'll show up in your logs, and they have really nice graphs for what type of traffic, what stuff was blocked, where it was coming from when it was blocked, and that sort of thing. And in addition to all this, you got some really nice Personally identifiable information filtering. We'll go through how to set that up. Basically, Palo has some unique ability to actually inspect the traffic and check, say, I see a like credit card number is in some piece of traffic that's flowing outbound. So say someone's trying to download some credit card numbers from your database, that'll show up in that traffic, and then the Palo can say, oh, I've seen too many credit card numbers coming through here, so I'm going to cut this connection off because it's probably a bad guy. Same thing with social security numbers. So let's get into the lab. Is anyone having issues starting things up? Yes, okay. So from what Katra was showing me, you probably got it in a suspended state right now, right? That's what, and it won't start. So you want to hit this cog icon up here. Or no, not that one. Okay, go to this and then hit this cog icon. You got this thing here. You should see discard suspended state right there. You want to click on that. That'll remove the suspended state, and then everything will be powered off. And then when you're done with that, you want to go into networking and find vCloud Internet right here. You right click on that and delete it. And then hit apply down here. And once all that's done, you should be able to turn it on, right, Kacha?
We'll see.
Yeah? I thought it worked for you.
If you notice, yours is aired out to it now. Cannot update network one.
Oh no, everything's powered on for me, so I can't actually do any of this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. Which is funny, because I can't pull it up in the catalog right now.
Okay.
Raw. Yeah, I can't do it available.
That's too bad.
So,
Well,
we had a lot to do.
vCloud Internet.
Normally is a little more testing. People who prepped it, which is not like tonight, had some upload.
So let's start walking you guys through some stuff. If you need like ask questions, just flag Kacha down. He'll help you out. Okay, let's get into it. So I'm going to jump onto Team 1 client. We'll start walking through some of this stuff. Let me log out here quick, if I can remember how. It's way down here for some reason. Okay. So you're going to want to go to, once you actually get in, 10.0.1.1 is the IP address of the Palo. You log in with admin password 1bang. It might take a little while to load since there's like there's like a lot of stuff in the interface. And I think like most of these VMs only have one CPU, unfortunately. Yeah, when you get in, it'll welcome you with this annoying message, which we can get rid of. And then you'll see here on the dashboard, we have that logged in admins thing way at the top there. So you can see where people have been logged in from and when they were. You can see it's still got my session sort of hanging around from my last login before I logged out. And you also see some system logs down here, so you can see like certain, like an admin logged in from this on the web from this IP address, and then you can see some failed logins lower down. You can see some DHCP stuff in there too. We'll get a little bit deeper in there as well. On the left side, you got some like basic networking information. They got some nice system resources and things like that. But what we're going to start with is under device. So obviously the first thing you want to do when you get onto a system is change the root password, the administrator password. So you're going to jump over to device, and then under administrators, you'll see all the admin users. Generally, there should only be one, unless you're already set up beforehand that you want to have more. So you're going to jump in here, click on admin. You can just type the old password in here and change it. Like that. I'm going to leave mine the same. In addition to admins, you also have regular users. This is something you probably don't have to worry about too much. But down here you can add extra users to the system. basically these users can't actually administer anything, but you can set them up so they can log in with like a captive portal type setup. So you can set up a captive portal on the Palo so that people have to log in order to actually use the internet. This is sort of how we're set up in the IA lab. You notice they have to log in through that captive portal to actually get onto the internet with your user account. You're not have to. There's not a whole lot else under the device section that we have to look into. Something interesting is the license management section. Might be under setup, maybe. I have to remember where it is. Yeah, but license management's a pretty important thing. So if you have a Palo, like sort of like in a business setting, you're gonna have to license it. Usually they're in like a yearly license. Basically what that means is that Palo, like throughout the year, will be like creating threat signatures, sort of like an IDS, as well as creating like new application signatures. So if some new, like really popular application comes across the wire, so like say there's some new thing happening over HTTPS that people haven't been doing before, they'll create a new application signature for that thing so you can put it into your firewall rules. But the big thing is that threat identification part, which their licenses will allow you to update. I have to remember where exactly it is under here. Oh yeah, that's not gonna work. I might post in Slack after the fact where like the actual, there's a section under here where you can update your those threat signatures. So you can get updates from Palo on those threat signatures so you can stay up to date and have like the most recent things. Other things that are sort of interesting here but not super important are on the setup section here. Under management, you can see you can set minimum password complexity if that's something you want to do. There's also settings to do with how often to sort of settings to do with logging, so you can sort of do rate limiting and things like that. There's also, here's where you manage the management interface, so you can set up the IP address for the management interface and determine what services are allowed on that interface. So sort of like Juniper, Palos will have a separate interface for management that you're supposed to use. So when you actually administer the system, you want to be on a completely different wired network so that like regular users can't actually even hit like the login page on the Palo itself. That's just a little bit of better security for you. In the regional CCDC, typically they will not use the management interface. They'll just allow people to access the admin stuff on the regular interfaces. But if you have the ability to set the stuff up yourself, like at Nationals, that's a really good thing to do. There's also some useful stuff under operations. So you can save your current configuration state and then restore that later. Sort of like we talked on the Juniper stuff, where you can save your running config and then reload it later on. So that's a really useful thing you can do right here. And then also you can do your reboot and shut down stuff. Okay, so getting into the meat of firewall things. Under network here, basically we have two interfaces configured. We have our internal network interface and then our external network interface. Those are going to be in two different zones. So one's going to be in the trust zone, one's going to be in the untrust zone. So here we see those interfaces right here. And if we click on them, you can modify like the IP address of the interface right here. You can set up sort of like address book things where you can give names to different IP addresses, but you can also just type in the IP address itself. There's also some sort of more advanced things you can do. So we'll see here that like the interface type here is layer 3. You could also change this to a layer 2 interface. What that means is that it works on basically layer 2 of the OSI. If you remember that from networking, it basically doesn't have an IP address on it at all, but it can still filter traffic like a layer 3 firewall. So basically, if you like want to set this up like in line somewhere in your network without having to actually modify like IP addresses on client systems in between them, this is a really nice and easy way to like slip this into your network really easily. Going from there, then also you'll see here that it has a management profile. I forgot to mention that. See that under advanced, I believe? Or no? Yeah, there it is. So yeah, under advanced and other info, you'll see the management profile here. So this is something that we configured beforehand that allows certain types of traffic to the actual host system itself. So if you're in like an actual setting where you didn't want this anymore because this is an interface that's accessible from like all of your internal client systems, you're going to want to set this to none typically. But don't do that right now because that's the way we're actually accessing the Palo right now. So I believe, yeah, if you go on the lower left here, you can see, I think it's under interface management. Yeah. Under network profiles and under interface management, you can see this is the admin management interface profile we set up. So here we see that it's allowing ping, it's allowing telnet, SSH, HTTP, and HTTPS, and SNMP to the system. So one thing we probably want to remove here is telnet, probably HTTP. You might want to remove SSH if you don't plan on using it. Probably don't need SNMP either. So we can get rid of those. And it's also important to note that this stuff isn't just for admin things. So you can also set up response pages right here, which are sort of a little bit more advanced. So like one of the important things that Palo does is that it can inspect traffic, right? So it can look into your actual HTTP traffic to make sure that it is HTTP traffic. You can actually look in there to like pick out personally identifiable information, sort of try to filter that stuff out. One of the issues with that is that if your traffic is encrypted, the Palo can't read any of it, so it can't actually do any of that like low-level filtering stuff. So one thing you can do is you can set up SSL decryption, where you create a HTTPS certificate on the Palo itself. You install that root certificate on all of your client systems, and then when they try to like go to google.com, you'll intercept that request and basically man in the middle all of their traffic from then between them and Google. So you can they'll encrypt their stuff and you'll decrypt it at the router, inspect the traffic, and then send it on. Obviously that has privacy implications, but if you're in like business setting, you don't have a ton of privacy, and it's also important to like actually be able to filter that stuff. So one of the issues with that is, what if you don't have the actual client certificate installed? Then what the Palo will do is it'll block your traffic, and if your response page is enabled, it'll tell the user, hey, you need to install this certificate, here it is, please do that. But moving on from management interfaces, let's talk about zones. You probably remember these from Juniper. Basically, we have the zone name. You have zone type, which is a little bit new. You can set these up as like layer 2 zones, so they'll be like tied to an interface rather than to like a subnet or something like that. And then you add different interfaces to the zones. One nice thing you can do is you can create zone protection profiles in Palo, which you can do sort of advanced like packet filtering, which is really useful for like DDoS protection. So here we see we can do we can protect against SYN floods, ICMP floods, stuff to do with reconnaissance. So we can alert when someone tries to do a port scan against something in our network, or like a host, or do like a ping sweep. Stuff to do with lots of different types of attacks, spoofed IP addresses, different things like that. This is a good thing to have enabled. Not necessarily on your like internal interface, but on your external interface. It's really good to have. So let's create one here. Let's go DDoS protection. I'll just enable the defaults for SYN floods and ICMP. And then I'll also enable port scans, host sweeps, UDP. I'll just hit OK there. And I'll save that. And then we can see here that zone protection profile shows up right there. I think another thing you can do in here is enable logging. Oh, that's log forwarding. Never mind. We'll talk about logging when we get to actual firewall rules. And then we'll see if we have the trust zone here that's attached to our Ethernet 1.2, which is our internal interface. There's a lot more stuff in here that you might want to mess around with if you want to get deeper into Palo. There's virtual wires which are sort of tied into doing that layer 2 setup that I talked about before, which is pretty interesting. You could also do some like block MAC addresses and things like that in here. But moving on to policies. Basically, under policies, we have security policies and NAT policies. So sort of like Juniper, we have our security policies are our firewall stuff. Basically, we have these two default policies that I talked about before. So we have the intra-zone default and the inter-zone default that sort of govern what traffic is allowed between zones and within the same zone. So we can add a new rule in here. Let's see, we have that web server, which is over here. You can see what the IP address on it is. 101. So we're going to do allow HTTP to 101, or to web server. Call it that. So under here, you'll notice that you see like the red squigglies, sort of like something's misspelled. That's the Palo telling you that this is something that has to be filled in order for the rule to actually go through. So under here, we have to set our source zone. So that's going to be untrust, because we're allowing traffic into our network. And then over on the right, you can specify the source address. We're going to leave that as any, because we want to allow everybody to access our web server. And then under destination, we have to set our destination zone, which is trust. And we'll set an IP address here, which will be 10.0.1.101. Which, oops. There we go. You can see that filled in there. Under user, we're not going to do the user part, but here, if you had like that captive portal setup, you could restrict even down to the user level. So you could say, like, I want to allow these certain users to access like the web server if they have logged in. That's something interesting you can do, but we're not going to worry about that right now. And here's the most important part, is the applications. So here, there's like probably like a few thousand different applications that Palo's pre-configured for you, that they can actually do like their signature detection on. We're going to use web browsing, which is the name of their HTTP application. Oops. Right there. So now it's only going to allow web traffic through. Only valid HTTP traffic is going to be allowed through. And then under service URL, leave that as application default. Basically, the service allows you to look for the application on a different port than its default port. So say we're running a web server on port 8080 instead of on port 80, we could set it up here to actually, you actually have to create a new service in order to do that, but basically it would show up, you could set that up so it would allow traffic, like HTTP traffic to port 8080 for that host. And another interesting thing you can do is you can actually filter on, like, you can do URL filtering, so you can only allow traffic to like certain websites. So you can block things related to like alcohol and tobacco auctions, hacking, gambling, things like that. We're going to leave this as any. Then our action area, we're going to set our action to allow. Then under here you see profile settings. Sort of like our zone protection profile, we can set up extra security profiles in order to like do additional filtering. So we could say we want to allow HTTP traffic through, but we want to block like buffer overflow attacks against our web server. So we could set up our zone protection, the profile setting here to actually block known threats. We'll do that in a second. Then over here on the log side, we see we're going to log the traffic at the end of the session. You can set up log forwarding and other things like QoS. So we're just hit OK there. So you can see that's done. You'll notice that I got added to just above our default policy stuff. So like I said before, all those default policies are always going to come at the end. So let's look into zone protection profiles. I believe, to remember exactly where it is. Yeah, I believe it's under objects here. Yeah, security profiles. Under objects and security profiles, we see we have some default things in here. So these are mostly what you're going to use in like a competition setting. If you're actually using Palo for real, you might want to like customize this to be sort of more suited to your actual network. But basically, there's like 7 or 8 different security profiles, or you're going to combine these into a profile group that we can apply to our firewall rules, so that we can block different types of traffic that we don't want. So obviously, under antivirus. Basically what this does is it works like an antivirus. It like looks for files that are coming in over the network. It'll like see if those match signatures for known like virus programs or malware, and then it'll block that stuff if it finds something that triggers it. Then we have anti-spyware, which is really useful in CCDC because basically spyware will beacon out to its command and control server every once in a while. In like real settings, it might just be like giving them like advertising information or like monitoring like what websites you're going to. But like in a CCDC setting, those beacons are actually like command and control stuff going back so they can get back into your network with persistence. So typically in competitions, you use strict. You might not want to do that all the time because obviously strict will sometimes give you more false positives. And then vulnerability protection. So basically, vulnerability protection will sort of try to match on known vulnerabilities in different web or like different applications. So if say you have like VSFTPD 2.3.4, you have that smiley face backdoor, it'll try to match on traffic that matches something trying to exploit that version of VSFTPD. Or if you have some web application with a known vulnerability, it'll try to match traffic that's trying to exploit that vulnerability. It'll also try to like trigger on like sort of known behaviors, like trying to do a buffer overflow. It'll try to like match on things that look like buffer overflow attacks, things like that. URL filtering, we typically don't worry about too much. They got some like default stuff to like, I'm going to block gambling, hacking, malware sites. File blocking is a little bit more interesting. If we look in there under add, thought you could do more here. Oh yeah. Not super crazy, but like, so file blocking, you can block certain types of files from being like transmitted over your network. So say you want to block people downloading executables, you can do that through this. You can block certain types, just like any type of file you kind of want. Like encrypted zip files. Maybe you want to like keep people from playing, like downloading MP4s or like large files, things that are like probably going to be big, things like that. Wildfire analysis. Wildfire is sort of their sort of, if you know VirusTotal, is basically, it's sort of like VirusTotal where you can upload samples to their Wildfire service. They'll detonate them in like a virtualized environment. They'll figure out what is going on with whatever they, whatever you transmitted to them, and then they might create a signature for that and then send it back to you, which is pretty nice. That comes with the Palo Alto license. Okay, so really interesting things, data filtering. So this is like I talked about before, this is where we can actually filter out personally identifiable information. So I'm going to do PI filter. And you can add different data patterns in here. So we'll create a new data pattern. And then, actually no, I'm doing this wrong. Should be some default patterns. If we look under custom objects on the left here under data patterns, we should be able to add some defaults usually. Unless this is like an old version of Palo. Remember what this does. You look at checklist. Must have removed it. That's too bad. Well, it seems like it's there. Let's do... It's not going to give it to us, unfortunately. Okay, so we could create one ourselves here. So let's do social security numbers. We can enter like a regex, which will match on certain patterns of data. So we can say, I want to look for 0 to 9, 0 to 9. So we'll do social security numbers with dashes. Like that. Weight of 10. And I think I just lost it. Shoot. Doesn't like it. Just delete this. Okay. Maybe that'll work. Okay, so that makes sense. It's a little bit different in the CLI version. But when we went in here and we set the weights on this, basically it has predefined like regular expression rules for credit card numbers, social security numbers, and social security numbers without dashes. And what we're doing in here is we're adding weights to say like which of these is more important to the rule. And then we just hit OK, and that sets up that predefined stuff. Then if we go down to data filtering, we go in here, PI filter, add that data pattern. We can click on it right there. And then we can say which applications we want to look for it in. So we can only look for an FTP traffic or HTTP traffic. Then we can also look for it only in certain types of files. So maybe we're looking for CSVs or TXT files. We can also look for upload and download. So we'd say we only want to see this when we're looking at traffic that's being like downloaded to a client system or uploaded somewhere else. Then we have the alert threshold and the block threshold. So it'll like keep track of the number of things it's seen in like the past X number of minutes, and then it'll alert us once it crosses the alert threshold, and it'll block stuff once it crosses the block threshold. And then we have denial of service protection. So this is basically what we saw with the zone, like the zone protection stuff, but you can apply it just to a specific rule in your firewall. Now, if we go down to security profile groups, we can go in here, we can create a group. We could do ultimate security. We can add our different profiles. We can add the antivirus default profile, add the strict spyware profile, all the way down the list. I'll leave that one blank. And then typically in competitions, you're not going to use the wildfire things, but if you're in like an actual business setting, it's also probably a good idea to set that up. So we'll click on that there. That's all set up. So with that in there, we can go back to our firewall policies over on this. Under policies, we can click back into the role we created earlier. And then under actions, we can set the profile type to group and set the group profile to ultimate security. So now any traffic that passes through that rule will also get subjected to the additional filtering that comes along with those security profiles. Okay. Let me snooze this. Okay. Okay, and then there's also, just like on Juniper stuff, there's also NAT things. We will probably won't run through all the NAT stuff, but just know that you can set up your source and destination NAT just like you would on a Juniper firewall. I could at least show you what the interface looks like. Sort of looks like this. So you can set up your NAT to do like destination NAT or source NAT and set up your translation and things. And you also see on the left side here we have that decryption policy. So this is where you can set that up, where you can generate that HTTPS certificate that your clients can use to actually allow you to man in the middle of their traffic. You can also set up the captive portal here as well if you want to. But the interesting things are all under the monitor tab. Unfortunately, we don't have any like threat traffic to actually show you. But all of your like traffic logs will show up under here, and then you also see threat logs as well. So if you set up your security profiles, anything that gets blocked by those security profiles will show up in this threat log. You also have URL filtering logs and data filtering logs. Under data filtering, that's where you'll see if someone tried to like download your PII, they'll show up there. You can also configure alarms to say like, I want to get an alert, I want to get emailed, I want to get like some other type of alert sent to me when like something shows up in the PII log or the threat log or something like that as well. You can also do packet captures. But interesting stuff is under Threat Monitor, I believe, which has no data to display. But under here is where you'd see like if you had some threats coming through, you would see like bar graphs and line graphs showing you, hey, you got like a bunch of like certain, like all these connections were trying to hit you with this type of threat. So like all this traffic was trying to do SQL injection, all this traffic was trying to exploit this specific CVE or some certain vulnerability. You can see all the source IPs and things like that. It's really useful for reporting. So if you need to like generate some report saying like, here's where all of our threats are coming from, here's what people are trying to hit us with like right now, That's where you can see all this stuff is under this threat monitor. And by default, it'll only show you like it's like top 10 threats, top 10 like source IP addresses for threats, but you can change that up here as well. You can see some network monitoring stuff. So you can see like what types of traffic are coming through the router. So you can see mostly web browsing and ping or SSL. Yeah, web browsing and SSL. See some NetBIOS stuff from Windows. If you're like actually on the internet, you can see like where your traffic is coming from, what IP addresses, which don't think any of this makes sense because we shouldn't really have been getting any traffic whatsoever. That's where that'll all show up. And then we can see all like the active connections under here as well. So if someone's like actively connected to our like web server, we can see that under here as well. And you can generate a bunch of reports and things like that. Let's see if there's anything else super interesting. Yeah, so the ACC tab is sort of like your action center. So this will give you like really nice dashboards saying like, here's what applications are being used right now, what like certain users are doing. You also see like sort of threat activity based or network activity under this tab. You can see threat activity under here. So you can see like where threats are coming from in real time in graphs under here. And also you can monitor blocked activity if that's something you're interested in. Although typically it's not super important to look at blocked activity because it got blocked and you don't really care. I believe that's everything we wanted to cover today. Does anybody have any questions about any of like the Palo things that I went through? Yeah.
You change the color scheme?
I don't know. Good question. It's probably under your device. Anything else? All right, that's all we have for today. Remember that Mock 5 is next Monday. If you haven't signed up for that yet, I believe the link's still in pretty low down in DefSec right now. Make sure you sign up for that if you want to come and play around in the mock on Monday. Well, that's it. Thanks for coming.